Hello fellow peers at Bible College. Thank you for your attention. And today I want to talk about offering your life to God. It's a big thing. But first, before we get into that, I want to try something. I want you to try and think about the best person that you know. Is this person perfect? And probably not. I'm sure there are a couple of things that we could think about that they could improve upon. When I think of the perfect person, I think of Jesus. He was completely within God's will and reacted in goodness because of this. I believe as Christians, it is our ideal situation to live like Jesus, and to show you that this isn't a far-fetched idea but is possible. I'll be reading from Romans chapter 12, verse 1 and 2. The big picture of this states that after we consider the mercy of God, we should offer our whole life to Him. I'll be showing you that this offering that we can make is an act of worship that pleases God. It can be achieved by not conforming to this world. And lastly, that it changes our behavior, which allows us to please God by doing His will. So what exactly does it mean to offer yourself to God? Well, to answer that question, I will start in verse 1 here, where Paul urges the readers of his letter that they should do it, and that it is also an act of worship. The passage begins with an appeal to present yourself to God as a living sacrifice, but to first consider God's mercy, and that's quite important. He writes, "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in light of God's mercy, to offer your body, as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true worship." For the reader to offer their bodies as a living sacrifice means that they must deny their everyday, ordinary life. Sleeping, eating, going to work, talking to friends, walking around, you name it, everything. We deny these things and we embrace what God has for us. The intended audience for Paul's writings were a mix of Jews and Gentiles as part of the early church in Rome. As Christians, we should also take advice from Paul and offer our bodies as living sacrifices that is holy and pleasing to God. It may seem daunting to give up so much of our life. We might be more comfortable right now in our own situation. Maybe we serve on a Sunday at our local church and that's pretty comfortable and that's nice. But Paul urged us to make this offering in light of God's mercy, especially the ones he detailed in the previous 11 chapters. He went on and shared all this information about the mercy of God, and now he wants you to respond to it. He wants us to be thankful for these mercies and come to offer ourselves from a place of thanksgiving. Can I ask you, where would we be if it weren't for God? Doing this, he says, pleases God and is also considered worship. So it's a win-win situation. Having considered that offering ourselves to God as living sacrifices is worship, it is also important to note that Paul attempts to describe how and why we are not already in that position. You may have heard from a colleague or friend before, Christians are such hypocrites. And the unfortunate thing is that sometimes this is true. I know I've heard that before. How can it be that a Christian who has the Holy Spirit living within them and all of its goodness does not show the same goodness as well? It is because they are influenced by the world. The world influences us and its values on us, and most of the times it's not great. It's usually of sin and ungodly behaviour. But Paul writes in verse 2, "Do not conform to the patterns of this world," and highlights that it is the world that has the pattern of sin, and that we can either conform to it or we can oppose it. As Christians, we must understand that we are new creations, that our old, sinful, worldly nature died on the cross with Jesus, and that we were resurrected into a place of righteousness with the Holy Spirit in Jesus' resurrection. From the world we were in sin, but from the Spirit we are made righteous. For us to conform to the patterns of this world, I put it in this way, is like a police officer who goes out and does crime. It's a bit of a strange situation. I say it because in this we are like the police officers. We have inherited or been given authority to live out and uphold just things, but instead chooses to be like most others and be unjust. Considering this, to not conform to the pattern of the world, what we must do is we must renew our minds. When we have renewed minds and understand our new nature, we will demonstrate the good will of God. As we continue in Paul's writing, this is still in Romans 12 verse 2, he states, "But be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will." That is incredible. Our minds are without moral direction as we are, and we can be influenced by either the pattern of this world and be used as devices for sin, or by the Holy Spirit and be used as devices for God's will, which is goodness. As born-again believers, Paul is urging the Romans and us to renew our minds. We must change the way that we think about sin, or how we sin, that is. Once we do that and we embrace the fact that we have the best thing, the influence of the Holy Spirit, to enable us to not sin, then we will be tuned in and receptive to God's will, which is goodness. And as a result of that, we react and respond in goodness. We do good things. I want to tell a story. I recently went to and travelled to the Philippines. It was my first time out of the country. My mission was a mission to share the gospel publicly there. During our first outreach moment with my team, I had the opportunity to pray for a diseased man to be healed. But unfortunately he wasn't healed. I took this matter to my mentor and asked him why this is, and he said it's because of my unbelief. And unfortunately, when I reflected on this, I did not believe that this man could have been healed. But I remembered the miracles that Jesus had performed. He was perfect, he was tuned into God's will, and he performed healing miracles as well. And I declared that these same miracles can be performed through me by the Holy Spirit that dwells within me. Then on many occasions in the future, when ill people came to me for prayer, I prayed for healing, and I believed that they could have been healed. And they were. I initially conformed to the pattern of this world, which states that people just don't get healed like that. I completely believed it. But upon renewing my mind and believing my new nature, my identity with the Holy Spirit, and what that entitles me to, I was able to be receptive, and I tuned into the will of God, which is goodness and healing. And as a natural response, they came from me as well, goodness and healing. I'd like to wrap it up now. As it is our desire to be like Jesus, the perfect person, and in light of this information from Romans 12, verse 1 and 2, we should offer our lives to God. Not only is this a pure act of worship, but it's accessible to every born-again believer. When we renew our minds and offer our lives to God, He is able to work His will in us and allow us to respond in goodness. Therefore, brothers and sisters, I urge you, in light of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Thank you for listening.